and welcome to another episode of the Mediocrity Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Mike Forrest, but we have a real special guest today. He's our first non-athlete that I've had on the show, but this guy has shaped the way we look at sports and watch sports um, for a very, very long time. Um, he was with ABC Sports from 1966 to 1996, winner of multiple Emmy Awards. I believe it was 13 Emmy Awards, including an Emmy for Outstanding Edited Sports Series for ABC Wide World of Sports. Try to say that three times fast. He also won an Emmy for Outstanding Achievement in Sports Programming in 1974. He played a pivotal role in shaping broadcast coverage of iconic events such as the Olympics, the Little League World Series, and most famously Monday Night Football. He was also senior vice president of the NFL from 1997 to 2003, where he was in charge of the broadcasting team, instant replay, and also the scheduling for the NFL. And finally, if that wasn't enough, from 1996 to 2020, he served on the Little League Board of Directors, including 5 years as the chairman of Little League Baseball, where once again he was a key figure in enhancing the television coverage of the Little League World Series and its partnership with ESPN. Everybody, welcome on the show today, Dennis Lewin. Dennis, thanks for doing this. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
You're more than welcome.
I'm super excited. The stories that you have. We had lunch in San Diego a couple of years ago and had my ear for 2 hours. And I'm not going to keep you that long today, but yeah, I've been really looking forward to doing this.
Well, I'm not going to bore your audience for 2 hours.
I'm telling you, the stories you have, none of them would be bored. But again, I appreciate you doing this. Usually I start kind of where people were born and raised, and I know you were born in New York. Just give us a little bit of your background and how you. I obviously you were a lover of sports, but how you got into kind of the production of broadcasting.
Some of it was pure luck. When I went to college, all I knew I wanted to do was in some form get into sports. I went to Michigan State. I knew I wasn't good enough to be an athlete there. And I tried dabbling in a variety of things. I tried broadcasting, marketing, journalism. And the one I liked the most was broadcasting. And I took that as my major. When I got out of school, I pounded the pavement, tried to get jobs at every network. But every network then was a total of three: ABC, CBS, right, and NBC. It was a very small universe compared to what exists today. And they were the only three people doing sports. I ended up starting out as a page at NBC. And I had previously done an interview at ABC Sports, hoping to find some way in to ABC Sports, not knowing as what.
Right, sure.
I took the job as a page at NBC, and while I was there, I got called back by ABC asking me if I was still interested in the job. And making a very long story short, I had a very difficult decision to make because I had just gotten promoted out of being a page into something called slide and copy coordinator for Channel 4 in New York. And ABC ultimately offered me a job. This was in August of 1966, but the offer of the job was only through the football season of 1966.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I really had a debate as to what I should do because I had just gotten a promotion. I'd gotten all the way from making $65 a week to $82 a week. And I was being offered $85 a week, but only through the football season of 1966. But I finally decided if I was ever going to get into sports television, I should take the chance. I was 21 years old. When was I going to take this chance? I took it and I stayed at ABC Sports for 30 years.
Incredible. And when they gave you that gig to work with the NFL, as a producer, or what was the original job? And then how were you put on the team? How did it work back then?
Well, we've got to sort of go
Because
backwards and
football, okay,
forwards, because I didn't start on football at ABC. When I walked in the door in football, it was probably at ABC Sports. It was probably the luckiest break I could get. There was a man named Jim Spence, who was then the coordinating producer of what was then our 5-year-old Wide World of Sports show. Most people today have never even heard of the show. They may have heard of Wide World of Sports at Disney, because Disney owns Wide World of Sports at Disney. But in any case, I started as Jim Spence's assistant. He was coordinating the show on the air. He was in charge of coordinating it off the air, determining what events went on and programming it, and administering the show. So right away, I got exposed to administration, programming, and production, which very few people ever get. Jumping forward, I was in that job for about 3.5 years. Reluctantly, and I loved the show, still loved having done the show.
Sure.
But after 3.5 years, I felt I had done everything as Jim's assistant I could possibly do. And I went to him and his boss, Roone Arledge, and asked them if I could come off of Wide World of Sports, as much as I didn't want to, but because I really wanted to get experience doing other types of things. Well, unbeknownst to me, we had just negotiated for a thing called Monday Night Football. I knew nothing about that. I was made the replay producer in year 1 of Monday Night Football.
Which is a pretty big
a big
role.
We had 2 trucks, one doing replays, one doing the game. I was in the replay truck determining what replays would go in here. While I was in that role, about 6 months into the role, Jim Spence got promoted at ABC. I then got promoted into his role, coordinating Wide World of Sports, in addition to being on Monday Night Football. The second year of Monday Night Football, I was actually named the co-producer of Monday Night Football.
Wow.
So through the 1970s, I produced it for 7 years in the 70s, Monday Night Football. With the first year, people forget, was actually Keith Jackson and Howard Cosell and Don Meredith.
Right.
The second year, it became Frank Gifford, Howard Cosell, and Don Meredith.
Yeah, do you know, I didn't know, I thought you were part of the team that, so you said you didn't even know about Monday Night Football.
I didn't know we had negotiated.
Did you know they were talking about doing Monday Night Football? Because back then, that's innovative, putting on football in prime time.
No, the story behind it, I know the story behind it now, but I didn't know at that point. What had actually happened was CBS and NBC had both turned down. It was the idea of Pete Rozelle and Art Modell, who was then the chairman of the broadcast committee of the NFL.
And Art Modell
was the owner of the Cleveland Browns at the time. And they had this idea to start a Monday Night Football series. And they went to the networks. CBS and NBC turned it down because I didn't think it would work in prime time.
Right.
And they didn't want to move off any of their primetime shows that they had. And then, so they came to ABC about it. And at first, ABC's hierarchy said no to Roone Arledge, my boss, my ultimate boss, about acquiring it. They didn't want to acquire it. But Roone was smart enough and was brilliant in the industry. He really created sports television as we know it today. But he finally convinced his boss, Leonard Goldenson, who was then running ABC, that if ABC didn't buy Monday Night Football, there was going to be a startup network which was just starting up. It was called the Hughes Television Network. And that they would take Monday Night Football and build a network around it and become competitive to ABC as a network. He finally convinced Roone convinced Leonard Goldenson that was true. Roone proved to be right. Monday Night Football ended up being highly successful.
Sure, yeah, just a little bit.
especially in the 70s and into the mid 80s, it was appointment television.
It was must watch.
It was must watch.
It really changed the way.
We used to call it water cooler television.
Yeah, right.
Because everybody were in their offices the next day around the water cooler would be talking about Monday Night Football, what Howard said, what Don Meredith said, and it took off from there.
Now, I know you had mentioned the original broadcast team of Keith Jackson, Howard Cosell, and Don Meredith. And Keith Jackson, I grew up watching, doing college football. He's my favorite announcer of all time.
As it should be. Keith was a wonderful person, wonderful talent. I worked with Keith for many, many years on other things.
Sure.
But Roone had wanted Frank Gifford to be in the role of play-by-play of Monday Night Football from the beginning.
Okay.
And what had happened was he had spoken to Giff about it, but Giff was under contract to CBS in 1970.
Gotcha.
So he was not free to negotiate for Gifford at that point in time. But it was Gifford who recommended to Roone that he hire Don Meredith. And then Roone decided to put Keith on as the three guys.
Okay.
And he had decided Howard, who was the controversial figure on the show.
Okay.
Howard was a lightning rod. But he wanted Giff all along. It wasn't that he didn't want Keith. As soon as Keith came off, he became our lead on college football.
Right. And I mean, like I said,
and the rest is history.
The rest is history there with Keith. And then I guess the rest is history with Frank. And that team, I guess Frank, Howard Cosell, and Don Meredith, you could argue, is team-wise, is one of the greatest broadcasting teams
of
all time.
No question about it.
Now, what made it Howard? You mentioned he was kind of lightning rod, and I, as a kid, loved Howard Cosell. I used to watch my dad loved boxing, so I'd watch Wide World Sports, Sugar Ray Leonard or Thomas Hearns, all that stuff. I loved Howard Cosell. His voice, his storytelling. What made him a lightning rod, and then how was it working with Howard Cosell?
Howard was a lightning rod because he always spoke his mind. And Howard wasn't afraid to say somebody did well, but somebody else did badly. And when he started talking in negative terms about athletes, it became a lightning rod. You knew it from the first game we ever did. Actually, it was a preseason game in Detroit, but the first regular season game we ever did.
Jets-Browns?
Was Jets-Browns. September 21, 1970. And during the game, he had some critical remarks about Joe Namath. He had some critical remarks about the linebacker's name, but one of the linebackers for the Browns. After that broadcast, the calls started coming in about Howard from both sides. He's anti-Jets, he's anti-Browns. And that went on for the next 15 years of Howard's association with Monday Night Football.
But back then, too, as the announcer, you really didn't do that, right? You kind of...
No. People were used to, in those years, most of the broadcasts on radio or television were controlled by the teams. So the broadcasters were beholden to the teams. And I'm not going to use the word shill. That wouldn't be fair to the broadcasters.
Right, sure.
Because there were great broadcasters like Kurt Gowdy, people like that.
Right.
Vince Scully.
Oh, Vince Scully, unbelievable. Yeah.
Mel Allen, Red Barber. You can name all the great broadcasters of that era. But still, at the end of the day, they were more positive about their teams.
Right.
If there were negatives, there's more about the other team than the team
they were announcing on. Yeah, sure. Tell me about some of the innovations that you brought to the table and your team for Monday Night Football that people take for granted now, but when you were broadcasting Monday Night Football, for instance, they didn't have sideline reporters in the beginning, right? Like nobody had sideline. You guys introduced that, didn't you?
Well, that actually happened much later on. When I was senior vice president of programming of production at ABC Sports, and we were coming up to a contract negotiation with the NFL. And by then, my boss was a man named Dennis Swanson. And I went to Dennis and I said, one of the things you should try and get in the contract is the right to have a sideline reporter. Because we had Lynn Swan working for us on other events.
Okay.
but I really wanted to put Swanee on the sideline of Monday Night Football.
Sure.
And that got into that contract that we negotiated. And that opened the door for sideline reporters for everybody.
Yeah, incredible. And back then too, right? Wasn't it to where you could have a sideline reporter, but they had to stay up on like the 20-yard line or within an area first, like they couldn't move around much. And...
Well, again, I got to jump forward again because I got to jump forward. Yes, that's true. The history of the NFL from the time we got approval to put a sideline reporter on the field was he had to stay anchored, as you said, to a spot on the field, like the 25-yard line. Much later on, when I moved to the NFL, they had recruited me to replace my friend Val Pinchbeck, who was then senior vice president at the NFL of broadcasting. And I had told the commissioner when I came in that the one thing I wouldn't do was push my friend out of a job. And I would take the job, but if after the year they wanted me to overlap with him for a year,
Gotcha.
to learn what the broadcast department did from their side, as well as prepare a television contract for the 1998 negotiation. So I did that. When I got there, one of the things I ultimately changed when it was my job was to unchain the field reporters.
Gotcha.
To
Interesting.
let them move around the field. The only ground rule I put on that was that they couldn't stop behind the bench and listen into conversations behind the bench and then report those conversations. They could report anything they saw because that was open to the public. But in my mind, the bench area, even though it wasn't built like a baseball dugout, was sort of their baseball dugout.
Sure.
They should have the right to speak privately, whether it's strategy or anything else, and not have somebody reporting
or pick it up. Yeah.
So I gave them the right to move around. I gave them the right to be anywhere, just not anchor behind the bench and not report anything they heard behind.
Okay. And then on Monday Night Football, as far as other innovations, I guess you guys kind of were the leader or front runner in kind of the graphics, right? Replays, storytelling.
Well, it was beyond that. It was all of what you just mentioned. But let's go back to the start of it, 1970, when Chet Forty, who was then the producer-director, I was producing the replay unit, he and I went out and did what we called surveys at every stadium we were going to be in, every ballpark we were going to be in. We were coming in with more cameras in more places for the purpose of coverage of the game and for the purpose of replays. In those days, most of the cameras were sitting on the 50-yard line. When we'd go into a stadium, they'd tell us, oh, well, CBS had 4 or 5 cameras. They had 3 on the 50 and maybe 1 in each end zone.
Right.
And we said, well, we want to go beyond that. We want to have a card on the field with a camera on it, moving back and forth.
Wow, yeah.
We want to have handhelds by the benches. We only want 2 on the 50. We want 2 on each, 1 on each 20 or 25-yard line. They said, but we don't do it that way. I said, well, that's the way we do it.
This is prime time now, right?
This is prime time.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they succumbed to most of it, and they went along with us. The only problems we had were in stadiums where they were actually built for baseball. Like, let's take Minneapolis as an example.
Sure.
The old Metropolitan Stadium in Minneapolis, which was where the Minnesota Twins were playing. That stadium was built for baseball. And it actually, all the baseball fields in those years were crowned for runoff in case of rain. So the problem was when you had a crowned field, if you were sitting in the front row or front rows in those stadiums, arguably the best seats in the house,
right,
you were below field level at certain points, and you couldn't see all the way to the other side. Well, our cameras, if they were going to run along behind the bench, they were going to block people.
Sure.
Most of the stadiums today are built higher,
yeah,
and those carts can go back and forth without much obstruction. So that was all new to them. I made 3 trips to Minneapolis by myself, back to talk to Jim Finks, who was then I forget his exact title, I think general manager of the Minnesota Vikings, to convince him that we should be allowed to put a cart on the field. And the agreement we came up with ultimately, he would let us do it as long as, yes, you could have a cart there. Yes, you could have a camera on it, but it couldn't be mounted like every other camera with a tripod sitting on top.
Right.
And with a cameraman walking alongside on top of the platform. It had to be mounted on the cart with a cameraman walking along the cart with the cart. So it couldn't be raised any further, blocking more views. But that's the type of thing we went through at different stadiums.
Yeah, incredible. And again, all of that stuff you guys did has now shaped the coverage that we see today, which is pretty remarkable.
And even the 25-yard line cameras, we would go into stadiums where CBS had been covering were just three cameras on the 50. And they'd say, what do you need? It's CBS coverage from here. It's the best seat in the house. And I'd say, or Chet would say, it may be the best seat in the house as long as you can't have one at either end and you can't move with them.
Right.
But we want to move with the play.
Yeah.
We don't want to look at everything from behind.
Yeah, that's so incredible.
It changed a lot.
Yeah, that's amazing. How did the first Monday Night Football game, how did it do in the ratings? Did it meet your guys' expectations, or was Monday Night Football kind of a slow build up?
It was both.
Okay.
It more than met our expectations, but to get to the ratings that ultimately got to was a build up. But we knew from day one, based on the reaction we're getting, among other things, to the announcers.
Yes.
There were a lot of people watching. And it grew from there. It just kept growing. And eventually, it would win the night on Monday nights, which, much to the surprise of CBS and NBC, who would both had a chance to do it and rejected it.
Yeah. What would you say was kind of the toughest challenges for you, innovation wise, filming a broadcast? I know we mentioned all the cameras. Was there anything else that was pretty difficult on your end, kind of in production and producing?
No, that was really the
main stuff.
Most difficult part of it. Also, you had 3 large egos in the booth.
Right. Well, that's what I'm getting at.
Which was a different situation. Just trying to manage 3 people with 3 different, very large egos in the booth was also a challenge.
And how did everybody, quote unquote, play together? Were they friendly on and off the mic? Or, I mean, like you said, they all have egos. And you've read certain things, coming up where Howard Cosell could be kind of labeled difficult to work with. Did you find that at all?
He wasn't difficult to work with for me.
Okay.
At least for many years on Monday Night Football. Later on, Howard became more difficult to work with. He became embittered about the industry. It wasn't aimed at anybody in particular. And it became more difficult as he became more embittered about the industry itself. But the industry itself is what created Howard. And so it was difficult from that standpoint.
Now, you had a few kind of big moments on Monday Night Football that, people still remember today. October 9th, 1992, Raiders-Oilers. Raiders are blowing the Oilers out. It's 34-0. I don't know if you remember this, but it kind of went down. And my understanding is that they were down 34-0.
Your dates are wrong.
Oh, blame Wikipedia on that.
Because I did produce that.
Okay.
You're talking about that we're number 1?
Yes, you got it.
That was. You want to go back and say
No. We could leave that. I screw up all the time with this.
Okay, you screwed up.
Yeah.
How many more episodes do you have to go?
Yeah. We screw up dates all the time. And it's not my screw up.
I was producing that.
Okay.
And the reality is what happened was, yes, it was a blowout. Yes, it was about 34-0. And our director at the time decided to take a shot of a guy sitting off of one end. He was all by himself in the stands. And he would look like he was sleeping. He was like this. And he had his eyes closed. And as we zoomed into him, he wasn't sleeping. He looked up at the camera, gave us a middle finger. And what happened at that point is, and I'm only telling you the honest part of the story because Meredith admitted to his wife years later that I was the one who gave him the line.
Yes.
But I hit the key to Don and I said, he's saying we're number one. And Don said, that means we're number one.
Yeah.
And that line took off, became one of Don's favorite lines. I never took credit for it until I was actually at the NFL. And the commissioner, Paul Tagliabue, at the time, threw a party for Frank Gifford, and Don was there. And his wife, Susan, came over to me and said, Don finally admitted to me that you gave him the line. So it had now become public.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like you said, it's one of the...
But it's one of the things you do in broadcasting that the public never knows or understands. It's a partnership with the talent in the booth and the truck. And a lot of times the talent is leading where the shots are going based on something they're seeing. But at other times the truck is leading the talent where they're going based on what you're seeing or feeling. And it may be a producer saying, let's talk about Pete Rose at this point in time. If you're doing a baseball game, because you wanted to get on a story. So we do a thing about Pete Rose. So it's a two-way street with producers and announcers. And so that's how I happened to give the line to Don. It was something that went on all the time.
Now, did you have any other incidences behind the scenes that, you know, things might have been going haywire that you had to save or, you know, help the broadcast team out with some other fake, you know what I mean?
The only other one I can think of is one time it was during a World Series game. I think it was Baltimore, Philadelphia I was producing. And we had done an interview. Pete Rose was playing for the Phillies at the time. And we'd done an interview with Bill Giles, who was running the Phillies at the time. And in the interview, Howard Cosell was doing the interview. Howard asked him, what about Pete Rose? Are you going to sign him for next year? Because he was a free agent at the end of the year. And Bill gave us an answer, long answer. And part of it was that basically he wasn't sure he would deal with that at the end of the year. So now we do an interview with Pete Rose. And during the interview with Pete Rose, Howard says to Pete, and this is all pregame, not on the air live.
Right.
Howard goes to Pete and says, Pete, what are you looking towards for next year? Because Bill Giles tells me they're not going to sign you. And Howard kept going and finished the interview. And Pete walks away and finishes the interview. And I said, Howard, you got to get Pete back. That's not what Bill said. Bill said he wasn't sure about it. And Howard said, well, I thought that's what he said. I said, Howard, it's not what he said. You got to get him back. He said, like all these other people standing around. I said, go tell Pete we had a problem with the tape or something, but get him back and redo the interview. And you can't say that Bill definitively said he's going to be gone. You can tell him that he said he might be, didn't have an answer yet, but you can't tell him he's gone. So reluctantly, Howard went, got Pete, got him back in, put him down in the chair again, did the interview again, changed that, told him, and we opened the show with it. We opened the show with both Bill and Pete.
Gotcha. Nice.
And Howard, after the interview aired, clicked his key to me, and it was one of the rare times Howard ever did that. You had a talk back system where you could talk off the air. And Howard said to me, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's great. Back to kind of Monday Night Football, then so this might not have anything to do with your decision or how it played in, because you were off Monday Night Football in the mid-'80s. You were doing stuff. Al Michaels joined the staff in, 86?
Yes, and that was my doing and my boss's.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
I became the head of sports production in 1986. And my boss became Dennis Swanson. That's when I became the head of production. My former boss, Ron Arledge, who had been doing both sports and news, had been moved to just news at that point. So Dennis came to me and said, give me some things you'd like to do. And I told him there was a guy that was doing our boxing, a guy named Alex Wallow, that I wanted to put it under contract. And Dennis didn't know from how as well, but he said, "You think so? Go ahead." And we were actually going to do a boxing event that weekend. So we signed him, put him on. He'd been working for us as a producer doing promotion, but he was also a boxing guru off the air. And so he knew more about boxing than anybody I knew. And by then, Howard was off boxing.
Right.
Howard was gone from ABC at that point. And he said, "What else do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, Monday Night Football right now is a disaster. It's Frank Gifford, Joe Namath, and O.J. Simpson." And I said, "I think we should take O.J. and Joe off Monday Night Football. Doesn't work. And we should make a change there and put Al Michaels in the booth and put Frank Gifford in color and find a third guy for the booth." He said, "Let's do it." So I went out and told Al that that's what we were going to do. I went out and met with OJ in the Century Plaza in Los Angeles and told OJ that we were going to take him off Monday Night Football. And what my plan actually was at that point was to put OJ on college football with Keith Jackson, because I thought OJ would be a god on college campuses.
Sure.
And Keith was already a god on college.
Yes.
Football. So I thought it would be a perfect marriage. Ultimately, OJ turned it down. He wanted to stay on NFL. And he went to NBC doing regional college football games, which was a huge mistake for his career.
Regional NFL games or
Regional NFL games.
Okay.
I'm sorry, regional NFL games.
Huge
Being on the
mistake.
number 3 or 4 or 5
Yeah.
regional NFL game was a huge mistake for OJ's career.
Sure.
But anyway, that's how Al got on Monday Night Football. Dennis agreed with me. The rest is history.
Rest is history. Al Michaels, one of the greatest of all time, too. What made you said Monday Night Football at that time was a disaster?
The three guys just weren't
they
clicking
weren't
in the
clicking.
booth. There was no click between the three of them. It just wasn't working.
And in your opinion, Joe Namath that wasn't great inside the booth. Would that be fair to say, or?
Joe wasn't terrific in it, and a lot of people really didn't care for OJ in the booth.
Right.
Although I didn't think it was bad in the booth, I was willing to put him on college football.
Right.
But the combination of the three
just
wasn't
at
working.
all.
So I felt the biggest change we could make was to put Al on Monday Night Football and move Frank to color. Because Frank was a god on Monday Night Football.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Frank couldn't analyze football game. So that was why I felt it would work, having the two of them and bringing a third guy to work for the two of them. And we didn't find a third guy that 1 year. And then 1 year later, we got Dan Darrow.
Those three worked together for years.
They worked together for years. They were terrific.
They were great. Yeah.
And Dan was a guy I had previously tried to hire for college football, but he didn't want that job.
Oh, really?
So when we went back to him, we tried to get him in again. And originally, I had a thought of putting Dan on college football and hiring Bob Greasy from Monday Night Football, who's then at NBC. But Dennis convinced me it was better the other way around. So we hired the two of them, but the other way around.
And it all worked out, right?
It all worked out.
Yeah, bro. I wanted to kind of switch gears from Monday Night Football to the Olympics. You happen to produce a couple of the greatest events that ever happened during the Olympics, both good and bad. 1972, you were working the Olympics in Germany. Some incredible things happened there. I think you were working on the pool, so you got to see Mark Spitz essentially do Michael Phelps things before
I produced the Mark Spitz show.
Right, you produced which is the Michael Phelps show before Michael Phelps.
Yeah. And then later on, I produced the basketball one.
Which is again
Controversial game.
one of the craziest Olympic
First
basketball
game the
games.
Americans had ever lost.
And they were 63-0 in the Olympics going in. But then you also had the whole tragedy with the Israeli athletes being held hostage, and ultimately 11 Israeli athletes perishing during that time. How did that event shape? I think it happened, what, a week or week and a half into the Olympics, if I recall correctly, and then kind of how did it shape the way you guys covered the Olympics?
It happened after the first week of the Olympics.
Okay.
And it happened the morning after the swimming had concluded.
Okay.
I had no part of the coverage of the Israeli situation, other than once I heard what was going on, I went to the control room. I sat in the control room next to a man named Jeff Mason. Jeff was then our coordinating producer of the Olympics. And he and Moon Arledge and our broadcast operations staff, our engineering staff, pulled off miracles that day, getting everything covered and getting it all done.
Sure.
There's actually a movie out right now called September 5.
Okay.
And it's all about ABC Sports Studio the day of the Olympics. I'm not shown in it, I'm not talked about in it, but it's about the job that Mace did, about the job that Moon Arledge did. And Mace actually became an executive producer of the movie. It was a German film company that did the movie. It was made in English. But it intersperses dramatization with some of the real scenes that occurred that day.
Okay.
With Jim McKay, with the terrorists, etc.
I was going to say
it's actually a very well done movie.
Okay.
It collapses the time a lot for obvious reasons. It's a 90-minute movie that collapsed maybe 14 hours of time.
Yeah.
But it was very well done, and Mace made sure they were doing it accurately.
Sure. And the ABC ended up going with Jim McKay to be the person that essentially updated everybody on what was happening and what took place, correct?
McKay became our anchor for the day. And as soon as Roon heard what was going on, he immediately asked Mace to get McKay into the studio. Jim, because of experience on Wide World of Sports, because of Jim's worldliness, because of Jim's ability to tell a story, he felt Jim was the right guy for the job.
And he was. Yeah, sure. Back to basketball, as you mentioned, not to gloss over, obviously, the Olympics had to go on, right? Like, they didn't stop the Olympics, so other events happened. You were producing, as we briefly touched, 72 USA versus Russia championship game. USA were huge favorites, 63-0 in the Olympics in the history, never lost. Obviously, cut the story short, US lost the game. How was producing that game? Who was broadcasting the game, and kind of how did it play out? For those that don't know, USA lost in the last 3 seconds of the game, where there were numbers of different. The Russians said they called a timeout. They didn't call a timeout. They replayed the out of bounds thing 3 different times. They finally scored. It was a big mess. But how was producing something like that, especially the last 5 minutes of the basketball game?
Crazy. Crazy. The announcers were Frank Gifford was doing play-by-play, and Bill Russell was the color man.
And was that your call? Were you the one that put them on, or was that just prearranged?
That was prearranged.
Okay.
And they were doing the game. The American team was leading, I don't remember by how much, but enough that I was confident enough they were going to win. I sent Russ to the locker room to interview the U.S. coach, Hank Iba, with about 2 minutes to play in the game.
Okay.
That's where he was through the whole end of the game. And little did any of us know what was going to happen. And as you said, there were 3 separate endings. The first ending was determined that there was still time left on the clock, only because the head of the International Federation had gone down to the scorer's table, ran down to it, and had them stop and replay it. So that was ending 1.
Yeah.
Ending 2 was when they inbounded a ball and they called a timeout. Ending 3 was and this ended the game, when the officials, and remember, the Russians were inbounding the ball. It was then the Soviet Union, not Russia.
Right. Soviet Union, correct.
Soviet Union was then inbounding the ball under their own basket with 3 seconds to play. And the official waved a basketball player, a U.S. basketball player, Tom McMillan, who later became a U.S. congressman, back. And ball was thrown the length of the court to, I think his name was Alexander Belov, who caught the ball under the U.S. basket, put it up and in, won the game for the Soviet Union.
And of course, back then, too, Olympic rules, international rules, is McMillan didn't have to move back.
No. But I was wondering about that for years and years and years. And I ended up at a dinner. I think it was a dinner for the Preakness Steaks in Baltimore one year, when out of utter coincidence, and this would have been sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, I was sitting next to Tom McMillan. And I turned to Tom and I said, I've got to ask you a question I've wanted to ask since 1972. Why did you move back? Because had you stayed there, he said, I was afraid that if I didn't move back, they were going to call a technical on us because they were calling everything against us.
Right, sure, yeah.
And that's why he moved back. Yeah. And that was the first time I knew why he had moved back.
Interesting. But the ref did tell him also, or no? He just felt like he was worried. The ref kind of warned him.
He kind of warned him. And he got back and he said he didn't want to get a technical call.
Now, what's incredible, too, is you sent Bill Russell back to interview the
So
US.
now Russ is in the locker room.
And there's no TVs in there. So he's not seeing any of this.
Nothing. And he's back in there. The camera hasn't gone back in yet because we needed it for the game.
Right.
So he's back in there waiting. I'm trying to describe to him what just occurred. And I can't describe it now.
It's impossible.
Much less then.
Yeah.
And he ultimately did interview Hank Gaiba. I'll tell you the follow-up to the whole story. Follow-up to the whole story was Frank Gifford and I sat in an empty arena, except for the Soviet basketball team, until 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, in case somebody decided that it was incorrect and they'd have to play the last 3 seconds again. And the only people in the arena were Frank and I and the Soviet basketball team.
Incredible. Yeah, amazing. And if for those could check it out, you can watch the game or the end. It's amazing.
It was amazing.
Yeah. And then we brought up Mark Spitz. How was that briefly? Like, I'm sure you're realizing you're witnessing history.
Oh, you did. No question. Race after race. I mean, he was 6 for 6.
Yeah.
Nobody ever done that before.
Yeah.
And Mark actually later on became one of our swimming analysts at ABC Sports. So I got to know Mark.
Yeah.
And we even do a monthly ABC Sports reunion Zoom call these days. And Mark's on it all the time.
That's awesome. That's great. And then the 1980 Winter Olympics, obviously the most famous, possibly game, period, not just hockey game, but probably the most famous game anywhere, the Miracle on Ice. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about the hockey back then? I think some of the games were on tape delay. That game was like, how did that game play out actually in real time? And then, Al Michaels, I think you had something to do with Al Michaels being put on the call for hockey during those Olympics.
There were a couple of us that sort of had oversight of different venues. And one of my oversight venues was the hockey venue. And I had put Al Michaels onto the hockey. I had known that Al had done hockey at the 1972 Olympics gold medal game.
Yeah.
And I also knew he liked hockey. And we had hired Ken Dryden to be his analyst. So they were the 2 people on the game. What few people remember is the US-USSR game. The game was fantastic, obviously. But it wasn't the championship game.
No, right.
It was a game that was supposed to be played we had a deal, ABC had a deal with the Olympic Committee and with the International Skating Union, I guess, were the people in charge of the hockey, or International Hockey Federation, I guess. And the deal was, before the games, that if the U.S. made it to the semifinal games, that game would be played on a Friday night in prime time for us. So all of a sudden, nobody expected that to really happen. To be honest with you, none of us did.
Yeah, of course not.
And all of a sudden, there it is. We're going to have a game, U.S. against Soviet Union on ABC, but the International Hockey Federation wouldn't play it in prime time for us.
Wow, even though you had an agreement.
Even though we had an agreement. They reneged on the agreement because the Soviets pressured them because of the time zone differences to the Soviet
And
Union.
they wanted them to be.
They wanted it earlier. And they ended up moving the game to afternoon. So because of my experience in Wide World of Sports, where we had do a lot of editing on the fly and shows Wide World of Sports, I was in the studio overseeing the telecast, but really just taking in the telecast. And a guy named Chet Forty, who was, I had mentioned before, was our producer of Monday Night Football for many years, and directed Monday Night Football for many years. He was producing the game. And I would be in the studio at tape machines, taking the feed in from Chet. Now, again, you got to remember, we had gotten blown out in a preseason game, figuring it's going to happen again here. So we had no reason to believe we were going to have anything but highlights of the game on the air.
So you guys are approaching this as we're not going to show the entire game, probably going to just do highlights, bits and pieces of a Soviet Union big victory over America, USA.
Yeah, exactly.
Incredible.
And we were doing live commentary. Al was doing live commentary with Ken Dryden, produced by Chet at the site. So we started out figuring, okay, we're going to get some of this in. So we're going along. And every time there'd be a whistle, because remember, it was going to be on tape, that would be a place we'd break and do a commercial. But remember, we weren't going to show the whole thing.
Right.
So I might cut out a whole segment. There'd be a whistle. I might cut out a whole segment. And I'd say to Chet, Al made these points in that segment. Have him make these points again if he wants to. So we'd do a pickup. We'd say, we're back. And he'd repeat some of the things he had said because they were going to get cut out.
Right.
Well, we went along and we kept condensing and condensing and condensing, same way I just told you. And the first period ends and we've got maybe out of 20 minutes, we've probably cut 10 minutes out.
Wow.
Now the second period comes along and we're doing the same thing. It's getting pretty good. So we cut maybe a little less, but we're still cutting things out. Now we get to the last period and all of a sudden it's really good. Now we're extending time because when we would go to commercial, we would pick it up from that point. So we're really extending real time because there were no breaks in hockey in those years. There were no TV timeouts. So as soon as the call would be made for, let's say, icing or offside or whatever it would be, we would pick it up as soon as they would start dropping the puck again. But in between, there'd be a minute, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes of commercials. We're really stretching real time.
Yeah.
So for the first two periods, we're collapsing real time. At the end, and when it was all done, Ron said to me, "Can we play the whole game?" And I said, "No." I said, "We were collapsing it because we never expected the whole thing." So that's what aired. Nobody could tell.
Yeah.
Nobody knew the difference once it was on the air.
But once it was aired, they only got about half of the first period, maybe 3/4 of the second period. But you never knew
missed
out anyway. Yeah. Incredible. But you did show pretty much the whole third period.
Third period, we stretched.
Yeah.
We showed the whole third period, plus inserted commercials.
Yeah.
So we were really stretching real time.
That's amazing.
But Al's great call of it,
Do you believe in miracles? Yes.
Yeah.
Did you know at that time how iconic that call? Obviously, it captured the time.
No.
But I mean, that's one of the most famous calls of all
Right.
time.
But what people forget that wasn't the gold medal game. The gold medal game was on Sunday, which was live, U.S. versus Finland. And that's when Al had the line, "Impossible dream come true."
And nobody remembers that line.
No.
Isn't it crazy? And that's the gold medal game.
That's the gold medal.
I don't even remember that line.
Yeah.
Everybody remembers "You
Right.
Believe in Miracles."
Right.
Amazing.
But Al was synonymous with the line, as he should be.
Yeah.
His line became a book, became a movie.
Oh yeah, and what's his name? Still famous for it today. The Mike Zeroni,
Michael Ruzioni.
Rosie for his his
Well,
play.
Mike came to work for us later on, and after every Olympics, because the U.S. hasn't won Olympics since.
No.
I would kid Mike after every Olympics, "You're still famous."
Yeah, exactly.
You got 4 more years.
That's incredible. Now that's an incredible story.
Yeah, one sidebar to that
Please.
is that game was so famous, in large part because television had grown by that point. Olympic television, thanks to us, in large part, had grown by that point. And it made it such a unique event. And even though most of the country had known the results of the game, the ratings went through the roof for the game. I could argue at some point it probably did better having been on tape than it would have had it been live, because people wouldn't have watched it all live.
Because they would have thought that we were going to get
Blowout.
killed. Yeah, no, that's very true.
And to show you the difference in time, in 1960, the Americans did the same thing, and it was televised. The U.S. beat the Soviet Union in the championship game for the gold medal.
Oh, really?
On television, on CBS, announced by Bud Palmer, and nobody remembers
Nobody remembers it.
Nobody
Incredible.
remembers it. Where the U.S. had a goalie by the name of Jack McCartan. They had a bunch of guys from Harvard, and they beat the Soviets.
Incredible.
They're the Cleary brothers. I still remember.
But not many do.
Not
That's
many
incredible. Yeah, yeah. I don't want to gloss. Obviously, there were other great moments, and I don't want to gloss over your experience with Wild World of Sports. Obviously, you guys covered a ton of sports back then that other places weren't covering, from downhill skiing to tennis to some other, lumberjacking, I think. But most famously for me, Wild World of Sports was boxing. You guys covered some of the greatest boxing matches of all time. What was your experience working some of the boxing? What was your favorite maybe boxing match while you were with Wild World of Sports?
Well, we had so many of them. It's hard to pick out one. But I would tell you my favorite athlete of all the athletes I've ever had a unique opportunity either get to know or work with would have been Ali.
Sure.
And I did so many things with Ali over the years, mainly in the studio, because a lot of the Ali events we did were actually televised live into theaters.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In those days, you didn't have satellites as they exist now. And when you didn't have pay-per-view as it exists now, and you didn't have cable television. So if you wanted to see a Muhammad Ali event live, you had to go to a theater and pay money for it. For many of them. Not all of them. For many of them. I actually did one of the live ones with Ali when he had his jaw busted by Ken Norton in San Diego. And we thought that was the end of Ali.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
No, nope.
It wasn't. But a lot of the stuff I did with Ali was in the studio after the fact, about fights he had fought that had been in the theaters. And then we bought him to air a week later on ABC.
Oh, really? That's how it was done. Okay.
A lot of them. Not
all of them, but okay.
No, not all. And I'll never forget, because I'd gotten close to Ali through the years. I think it was 1991 or 2. It was the 25th anniversary of what was then the new Madison Square Garden. It's the current Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
But it was then the new Madison Square Garden. And they had a big party on the floor for a lot of people at cover events at the Garden, you could buy tables. And at every table was a famous athlete from Madison Square Garden. And we, ABC Sports, had bought a table on the floor of the Garden for the party. And our star athlete at our table was Patrick Ewing. And at one point during the dinner, and the whole floor of the Garden, where the basketball court would have been, or the ice surface, all of it, was filled with tables. At one point, Patrick Ewing leaned over to my boss and told him he'd never met Ali and was wondering if there was a way to meet Ali. So my boss, and who I mentioned earlier, Dennis Swanson, was my boss at the time, came over to me and said, Patrick has never met Ali. He'd like to meet him. Can you find out if it's okay if Ewing goes over to Ali to meet him? So I said, sure. So I zigzagged through all the tables on the floor of the Garden, got to the far end of the Garden where Ali was sitting. And I can't remember what I usually either call him Ali or Champ or Muhammad. It would vary at the time.
Sure.
And whatever I called him at the time, I said, can I bring Patrick Ewing over? He says he's never met you. Can I bring him over to meet you? I said, no. He said, I'll come with you. I'll go back to your table. So Ali stood up, put his hands, and this is like 1991. Put his hands on the back of my shoulders. And I started leading him through the tables to get to our table. And we got about halfway. Ali leaned into my ear and said, Dennis, get no. And this was in 1991 or 2.
Yeah.
And by then Parkinson's had started to take its toll. But he came all the way over to our table. Patrick got to meet Ali. Got to get his autograph. Made Ewing's night. And I then led Ali back to his table.
That's incredible. Ali was there are a few athletes, Ali, Michael Jordan, where other athletes are just in utter awe of them. And they just have this presence about them.
You can't imagine, unless you lived through it, how big Ali was in the world.
Yes, 100%.
Ali's fame in the world was as big as, or bigger than anybody. He could go anywhere in the world and be instantly recognized.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anybody, athlete, politician, anybody that would have been that way.
And he's so charismatic.
So charismatic. He was once an announcer with me. He was an analyst for me on a fight we were doing live in Toronto with George Foreman. George Foreman, the idea was George Foreman was going to fight 5 3-round fights against 5, I'll call them stiffs.
To be kind, probably, right? Yeah.
But they were only going to be 3 rounds.
Yeah.
And Ali came up, he was my announcer, and we were sitting in a production meeting. And before that, I had said to Ali, remember, you're up here as an announcer. You're not up here as Muhammad Ali. It's not your show. You're up here as an analyst. You're going to analyze how George is doing. And it was at a time where Ali was sort of angling, marketing himself to try and fight George. George was the world champion at the time. So, bell rings for round 1 of the first fight. And next thing you know, Ali's into his act.
I was going to say, he probably doesn't have an off button.
He is screaming at Foreman, taunting Foreman all the way through. At one point, George wrestled the guy to the ground. He drove George crazy. George was a very nice man, and I'm sorry he just recently passed away. But George was a very nice man, lost his cool. And my boss, Moon Arledge, was actually up there at the same time. And Moon had gone to Ali and told him the same thing.
Just okay, yeah.
You're up here as an analyst. Just remember that. No.
That's incredible. That's amazing. We're gonna have you on again to go over 1,000 other things you did, but you've been kind with your time, so I'm just gonna end on our, as we call it, the shooting the shit segment. Just a couple rapid questions
I'm good
from
at
your
shit.
time. Favorite event to produce at ABC Sports? Your favorite all-time event? I know that's got to be tough. What you did.
I'm going to give you a surprise answer.
Yeah.
Because favorite is different than professional. My favorite as a person, because I'm a huge baseball fan and I always have been, was getting the opportunity to produce a couple of World Series.
And which World Series did you?
1983 and 5.
Okay.
And I produced what became the famous Don Denkinger game when there was a call missed at first base. It was before the age of instant replay. I've always believed to some degree it led to instant replay ultimately, but he missed a call at first base that you could say cost the St. Louis Cardinals game 6. Kansas City wins game 6. They then blow out the Cardinals in game 7. Joaquin Andujar goes nuts on the mound in game 3 and gets blown out. Gets thrown out of the game. But on a personal level, as a baseball fan from the time I was a kid till today, it meant more for me to sit in a chair and produce a baseball game. A World Series game in particular. I produced Monday Night Football for 9 years. Yeah. Did numerous All-Star games. Did numerous league championship series. But to get in this chair and produce the World Series a couple times probably was my favorite thing.
Yeah, awesome. You've worked with the greatest, of all time in the booths. I mean, numerous greats. Give me your Mount Rushmore. It's going to be a hard one for you, but give me your Mount Rushmore of announcers that you've worked with.
The danger is I'd be leaving one out.
I know.
I mean, I can't.
Or if you want to make Mount Rushmore 5 people there instead of 4.
I'm sure I'm going to leave people out. As hosts, as play-by-play.
Yeah.
Or people of that ilk. Jim McKay was great.
Yeah.
I got to work with Jim, be friends with Jim for 30 years. Great friend. Obviously, Al Michaels, we've talked about him before. We've talked about Keith Jackson before. Keith Jackson, Chris Schenkel, Kirk Gowdy. I could keep going. And I'm afraid, wait, I left an important one out, a very important one out. Howard Cosell.
I was just about to say, obviously, Howard Cosell.
I mean, there are so many. I could go on. I could name 40.
So your Mount Rushmore would be about 40 different, and they're all incredible. And they're all great.
Incredible for their own talent.
Sure. Yeah. It's pretty impressive, though.
And not only their own talent, it's the kind of people they were.
And just knowing you also have a little role in shaping their careers has to be.
Yeah, I didn't shape Kirk Gowdy's career too much.
No, but some of them.
I got
to work with him, and So, what was your favorite Monday Night Football moment?
I couldn't pick one moment. There were a lot of moments. The favorite game I ever produced was in the Houston Astrodome. It was Houston against Miami. And it featured Earl Campbell on one side and Bob Greasy on the other side. And one team would score and the other team would score. And Houston had the Love You Blue pom-poms and fight song going. And we'd come out of every commercial break where Houston had scored with the Love You Blue fight song going. And it was just a great game. It was, if I remember the score right, it was like 34-31. But it was just back and forth the entire game. Just one of the, and Earl Campbell going this way, Bob Greasy going.
Yeah.
It was just a great game.
Awesome. And second to last question here. I think you kind of answered.
That would make it the penultimate question.
Thank you. Yes. That's why he's who he is. I'm just a side host. Favorite, and I think you've answered this already, so maybe excluding Muhammad Ali, the favorite athlete you had a chance to actually work with.
I would be hard pressed to pick one out over another.
Yeah.
Other than Ali, because I worked with so many great ones. I'd be hesitant to try and pick one person.
But Ali was the
the best as an athlete. My favorite athlete that I've ever gotten to know because of who he was and what he stood for, which a lot of people in this country hated him.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. We didn't talk about Jim McKay much, and I know you guys also worked with O.J. Simpson. Do you have any famous kind of Jim McKay stories or O.J. Simpson stories you
I've
want
got
to share? Probably
a lot of Jim
them.
McKay stories
Yeah.
and a lot of O.J. Simpson stories. But I'll tell you one funny story about the two of them together, which Jim would probably hate me telling. We had a production trailer. We were doing a track meet in, I guess it was Eugene, Oregon. And we had a production trailer, which is really just nothing more than a house trailer. And in the house trailer, we had cheese and crackers and a little spread set out. And one day we were in there, and Jim is eating some cheese, and he starts cutting the cheese. And I start laughing. And Jim eats a little of the cheese he's cut. Jim looked at me and said, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "Because you're cutting the cheese," no pun intended, with OJ's Afro comb. And here's the erudite Jim McKay, who has seen everything, done everything, didn't realize it was Afro comb.
Did OJ know that?
OJ wasn't ever in there.
Oh, he wasn't in the moment. Oh.
But he had left his comb sitting there.
Oh, hilarious. That's unbelievable. All right, final question. I don't know if you've seen any of my podcasts yet, but I ask all my guests this question. Any famous emergency bathroom situations you had to deal with?
Yes. The answer is yes.
Great.
As long as it's your ultimate question.
That is it. Yeah, that's where we end every show.
I was producing in Montreal at the Montreal Olympics. We had talked earlier about I had produced the Mark Spitz show. Well, in Montreal, I got to produce the Nadia Comaneci show, where she had gotten the first perfect 10 in the Olympics. She was the star of the Olympics in 1976. And when you're producing the Olympics in gymnastics, it's a long haul sitting in the trailer. You're sitting through rotation after rotation after rotation as they change apparatus. And finally, it got to a point where there was a break. And it was where the office trailer was parked outside the Montreal Forum. So I run inside the door of the Montreal Forum to the bathroom, which is sitting right inside the door. There's a guy standing there with his arms crossed, and I go in. He puts his arm out and stops. I said, "I'm producing for ABC. I really got to go to the bathroom." He said, "You can't go in there." I said, "Why can't I go in there?" He said, "Because the Prime Minister's in there." End of story.
End of story. Yeah, end of story.
End of emergency.
Yeah, incredible. Well, this was awesome, and as I stated earlier, your career spans so long, and there's so many other events. I would love to have you on again, maybe in the fall or another time.
I told you I'd be glad to.
Because we've only literally, I haven't even tackled half of the stuff this gentleman's seen or done. So, Dennis, thank you very much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Good to
Thank
see
you. Thank you.